There's a question I used to ask myself every spring when the creek behind my property flooded. I'd stand at the edge of it, watching the water eat into the bank, taking soil that had been there for decades, and I'd wonder, at what point does a river become a thief? I know now. A river becomes a thief the moment you realize it only ever flows in one direction, toward itself. My name is Nora Callihan. I'm 36 years old. For the past 9 years, I've run a small batch pottery and ceramics studio out of the Blue Ridge foothills in western North Carolina. I make things by hand, functional stoneware, sculptural pieces, custom memorial urns, and I teach workshops out of a converted mill building I restored board by board on a piece of land that once belonged to a textile company that went under in 1994. The studio is called Groundwork Ceramics. I named it that because everything I've built here started at ground level, not metaphorically, literally. I came to this land with student loan debt, a borrowed truck, and the kind of stubbornness that people who love you call determination, and people who don't call stupidity. 8 years into building something real, I thought I understood risk. Clay slips and cracks and explodes in the kiln. Glaze is unpredictable as people. Kilns fail at the worst hours. I thought I'd developed a tolerance for uncertainty. What I hadn't developed was a tolerance for the specific kind of loss that comes wrapped in the face of someone you've known your entire life. What my brother-in-law Marcus did at my studio's anniversary open house, and what unfolded over the 51 days that followed, didn't just change my finances. It changed how I understand love, loyalty, and the particular cruelty of people who mistake your open door for a permanent invitation. Stay with me, because what I found in a cardboard box in my storage room 3 weeks after the open house will change everything you think you know about the story. I didn't grow up making things. I grew up in a house where things were made to last out of necessity, not artistry. My father, Gordon Callihan, spent 30 years as a finish carpenter in Asheville. He could look at a warped door and tell you in 30 seconds what the wood was doing, why, and how to fix it. He had a shop in the garage that smelled like cedar and linseed oil, and he taught me early that skill is just patience made visible. My mother, Diane, was a bookkeeper at a regional credit union for 22 years. She kept the household accounts with the same precision she kept the office ledgers. Envelope budgeting before it was a trend, cash for groceries, exact change back in the kitchen drawer. Between them, I learned 2 things that would later save me: how to build carefully and how to count clearly. My sister Renata is 3 years younger. She has our father's green eyes and our mother's gift for numbers, though she never used it the way Mom did. Renata always had a plan, a scheme, a project that was going to change everything. Even as a teenager, she'd come to the dinner table with ideas the way other kids brought home permission slips: a resale clothing boutique, a drop-shipping operation, an Etsy store for vintage finds. Most of them fizzled within months. None of them did. We were close in the compressed, pressurized way siblings are when they grow up sharing a bathroom in a neighborhood and a set of anxieties about money. We fought loudly and forgave fast. She was my maid of honor when I married and divorced in my late 20s. I was the one she called from the hospital parking lot when she found out she was pregnant at 31. By then, she was with Marcus Webb. Marcus came into Renata's life the way certain weather systems arrive. Suddenly, with a lot of pressure, filling every room he entered. He was handsome in that effortless, difficult-to-pin-down way. Good jaw, easy laugh, the kind of handshake that makes men trust him before he said a word. He sold commercial real estate and talked about it the way some people talk about religion, with absolute certainty that the rewards were coming, just not yet. I tried to like Marcus. I genuinely tried. There was nothing specific I could point to in the first 2 years. Just a feeling. The same feeling I get when a piece comes out of the kiln slightly wrong. Nothing obviously broken, something not quite right. He had a way of inventorying things. Walk into a room and Marcus Webb's eyes did a quiet audit. He'd know the square footage of your kitchen, the brand of your truck, the approximate going rate for your zip code, and he'd have filed all of it somewhere useful before you'd finished introducing yourself. He visited Groundwork for the first time 4 years ago when Renata brought him for a weekend trip through the mountains. I gave them the studio tour. He asked good questions, load-bearing questions disguised as casual conversation. How much does a commission piece run? What's the average workshop size? You lease this building or own? I own it, I told him, lock, stock, and kiln. He nodded the way people nod when they're doing arithmetic. Groundwork Ceramics turned 9 years old in the second week of October. To mark it, I organized an open house, a 2-day event with live throwing demonstrations, discounted workshops, a sale on gallery pieces, and a catered reception on the Saturday evening. The mill building cleaned up beautifully, string lights across the ceiling, trestle tables laid out with my work, the smell of wood smoke from the outdoor fire pit mixing with the iron-rich scent of the wet clay. I sent invitations to 300 people, customers, students, neighbors, vendors, the small ceramics community I'd built over nearly a decade. I also invited family. Dad drove up from Asheville with his wife Carol. Aunt Rosalie and her daughter came from Greensboro. My college roommate Petra flew in from Portland, and Renata and Marcus drove up Saturday afternoon with their 2 kids, Caden, age 6, and Sophie, age 4. I hadn't seen Renata since the summer. We'd been texting, the kind of frequent, shallow texting that creates the illusion of closeness without the substance of it. She looked thinner. Her laugh came a half-beat late, like it had to travel farther than usual. Marcus looked the same as always. Pressed shirt, easy grin, hand on Renata's back in the way that could mean affection or could mean steering, depending on the day. The open house ran from 11 to 5, with the evening reception from 6 to 9. My studio manager, Elliot Marsh, had set up a point-of-sale station near the entrance. A tablet mounted on a wooden stand, connected to a card reader, running our business account through the studio's merchant app. The same app I used for payroll, supply invoices, and the monthly rent on the kiln storage unit. I was in the throwing room most of the afternoon, doing demonstrations. It's a small, warm space with exposed brick and a skylight, the wheel in the center, the smell of earth and water, the audience of 6 or 8 at a time watching the clay rise and open under my hands. I love those demonstrations. It's the closest thing I have to a meditation practice. Around 3:30, Elliot radioed me from the sales floor. "Nora, we've got a vendor question about the consignment terms for the holiday show. Can you come sign off on something?" I stepped away from the wheel, washed my hands, and told the room I'd be right back. On my way through the main gallery, I passed the entrance station. Marcus was standing behind the tablet, leaning slightly over it, his back to the room. I noticed it in the peripheral way you notice most things when you're moving with purpose. He was there. He had his phone out. He was looking at something. I assumed he was checking messages or taking a photo of a piece for Renata. I had no reason to assume otherwise. The vendor conversation took 11 minutes. I know this because I checked my watch when I left the throwing room and again when I got back. 11 minutes. When I returned to the entrance, Marcus was across the room talking to my father, beer in hand, laughing about something. The tablet was on the stand. The card reader was plugged in. Everything looked right. I ran the evening reception until 9, poured wine, answered questions, watched my father walk the gallery with his hands clasped behind his back, the way he walks through things he's proud of. When everyone left, I cleaned up with Elliot, locked the building, and drove home. At 11 o'clock, I opened my laptop to review the day's sales figures before bed, a habit I'd never broken, not once in 9 years. The business account balance was $1,847. I had started the day with $44,200. I sat very still for a long time. Then, I opened the transaction history. 3 transfers had cleared through the merchant payment system that afternoon. They were tagged as vendor disbursements, a payment category I used for approved supplier transfers. They had gone out between 3:41 and 3:53 p.m., $16,500 at 3:41, $14,200 at 3:47, $11,800 at 3:53, total $42,500. The receiving account was listed under the initials MW. I read it 4 times. Then I picked up my phone and called the bank's after-hours line and listened to everything they told me, which amounted to the transfers were initiated from a registered device on an authorized merchant account. Disputing them would require a formal complaint and several business days. I hung up, sat at my kitchen table. Through the window, the trees were dark and still against the sky. $42,500. That was 16 weeks of payroll for Elliot. It was the gas and materials for the spring kiln run. It was the deposit I'd been building for the new glaze room expansion I'd been planning for 18 months. It was everything that allowed Groundwork Ceramics to exist as more than a dream I'd once had. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the table and watched the hours change. In the morning, I called Marcus. He answered on the second ring, cheerful as a Sunday. Nora, great party last night. The kids haven't stopped talking about the clay. Sophie wants you to teach her. I didn't return the warmth. Marcus, I need to talk to you about 3 transfers from my business account yesterday afternoon. $42,500 total. The receiving initials are MW. A pause. Not long. 3 seconds, maybe 4. But in those 4 seconds, I heard something collapse in him. The social scaffolding dropping. Then, okay, yeah, I was going to call you about that. Were you? Look, we're in a situation, Nora. Renata and I. The deal I've been working on in Piedmont is underwater, and we've got some commitments we can't cover right now. I transferred the money because we needed it. I'll pay it back. This isn't a big deal. You accessed my business merchant account without my knowledge or authorization and took $42,000. You need to tell me how. Another pause. This one felt different. Calculating. The tablet at the entry station. Renata showed me your merchant app once, months ago, when you were having the payment issue. You were logged in. It wasn't even locked. You took money from my business account because the screen was unlocked. I took what we needed because you have it and we don't. You've got your studio, your building, your whole operation. We've got a deal that's 30 days from closing and bills due now. I figured you'd understand. Your family. The word family in Marcus Webb's mouth had always sounded slightly off, like a word pronounced correctly by someone who'd only read it and never said it aloud. That's not borrowing, Marcus. That's theft. His voice changed. The warmth evaporated entirely, and what replaced it was something hard and entitled, a tone that told me this wasn't the first time he'd done something like this and gotten away with it. Theft is a serious word for helping yourself out of a tough spot with money from someone who can afford to lose it. You'll have it back. Stop being dramatic. I hung up. My hands were shaking, but not with fear or grief. With the very specific anger of someone who has just understood something clearly for the first time. I called Renata at noon. I'd been sitting with what to say for 3 hours. She answered with her voice already tight, which told me Marcus had gotten to her first. Nora, I know why you're calling. Do you? Marcus told me. I know it looks bad. I know the amount is. It's a lot. But this deal he's working on is real. It closes in 30 days. He just needed a bridge. He accessed my merchant account while I was in the throwing room and transferred $42,000 without asking me. He said you would have said no. I sat with that sentence for a moment, let it show me exactly the shape of what I was dealing with. He's right. I would have said no. That's why he didn't ask. Renata, do you understand what that means? She was quiet. It means he knew it was wrong. He did it anyway, because he decided my answer didn't matter. He's trying to save our family, Nora. You don't understand the pressure. I understand that $42,000 is how Elliot gets paid, how my kiln stays running, how I keep the lights on in a building I've spent 9 years building. I understand that money came out of my account while I was 15 feet away teaching someone to center clay. Her voice cracked. What are you going to do? I don't know yet, but I need you to understand what he did. She didn't answer. I could hear Sophie in the background singing something nonsensical and perfect the way 4-year-olds do. I love you, Renata. This is not about us, but I need you to hear me. She said she heard me. I'm still not sure she did. My mother called that evening. Margaret Callihan, 63, retired from the credit union after her second hip replacement, still sharp as the day she retired, still the first person in the room to see both sides of an argument, and occasionally this was a virtue, and occasionally it was the thing that made you want to scream. Nora, honey, Renata called me. I know she did. Now, I'm not saying what Marcus did was right. I'm not saying that. But I am saying that they've been struggling, and maybe there's a way to handle this that doesn't involve... Mom, he transferred $42,500 from my business operating account without my permission. That is not a family disagreement. That is a crime. A long pause. You're not going to call the police. I haven't decided what I'm going to do, but I need you to understand what happened before you tell me how to respond to it. I understand what happened. I just think there are children involved, Nora, Caden and Sophie. You love those kids. I do love them. That doesn't make their father entitled to my livelihood. Another pause. Then, quiet. You've always been the capable one. We've always leaned on you. I know. She didn't say anything more. Neither did I. The next morning, I called Vivian Park. Vivian was 51, a forensic accountant in Asheville who had done the studio's taxes for 6 years, and once found a $3,000 discrepancy in a vendor invoice that saved me from a small disaster. She was precise the way good craftspeople are precise. Not clinical, but exact. She cared about accuracy the way I cared about the depth of a glaze. "Send me everything," she said. "Transaction logs, account history, device records, everything from the past 90 days. I spent the afternoon pulling records and sending files. Then, I called Elliot. Elliot Marsh had been my studio manager for 4 years. He was 29, had a ceramics degree from Penland and a quiet steadiness that made him invaluable. He knew the studio as well as I did, the rhythms of it, the inventory, the customers, the workflows. When I told him what had happened, he was silent for a moment. "The tablet at the entry station," he said slowly. "The merchant app." "Yes." I saw him near it during the vendor call window. I didn't think anything of it. Neither did I. I can write up exactly what I observed, timestamps of what I saw where I was. "That would help. Thank you, Elliot." He paused. "Ms. Callahan, whatever you decide to do, I've been paid on time every single month for 4 years. I'll back whatever you need." I hadn't cried since the night it happened. I came close then. Vivian called me Thursday morning with the first wave of findings. The 3 transfers landed in a single account under Marcus Webb. He moved the money fast. Within 48 hours, most of it was gone in 3 directions. She walked me through it. $16,500 had been wired to a company called Webb Piedmont Partners, LLC, a commercial real estate venture Marcus had formed 9 months earlier. She'd pulled the state business registration. The company had 1 registered agent, Marcus Webb, no active filings, no listed assets. A shell, or something close to it. $11,800 had gone to a personal account at a different bank, then converted to a cashier's check. The payee on the cashier's check, Alton Reed, Vivian had flagged the name. That name comes up in Buncombe County civil court records twice in the past 3 years, both times in connection with private lending disputes. A private lender. Marcus owed money to someone who didn't accept digital payments. $14,200 was still sitting in the original receiving account, but Vivian flagged that it had already been partially drawn down. $4,000 was gone in the first 24 hours. The rest was pending authorization for a wire Vivian couldn't fully trace yet, but suspected was going to the same LLC. "This isn't someone covering household bills," Vivian said. "This is someone servicing a debt structure. He took your money and ran it through 3 channels to cover obligations he was already in default on. The LLC may be his attempt to flip a commercial property that's in trouble." "How much trouble?" "I can't say without more records, but the pattern looks like a man drowning who just grabbed the nearest rope." I asked her what she needed from me to build a complete picture. "Everything you have. And Nora," she paused, "you need to file a police report, not because it guarantees anything, but because without one, none of this documentation has legal traction." That brings me to what I found in the storage room. It was the Tuesday after the open house. I was in the back of the mill building going through bins of glaze materials and equipment I'd been meaning to sort since spring, trying to keep my hands busy while my mind worked. The storage room was a long, low-ceiling space that smelled like raw clay and old wood. I'd converted it from what used to be the mill's dye storage room. Half of it was shelving for supplies. The other half was where I kept records, overflow inventory, and the things I hadn't decided what to do with yet. Renata had left a tote bag there in the summer, during a visit, and hadn't come back for it. I'd texted her twice, and she'd said she'd get it next time she was up. I moved it to pull out a box of kiln shelves, and the bag tipped over. A notebook slid out, a small spiral-bound one, the kind with the black and white marbled cover. Renata had carried those since middle school. She bought them in bulk. I wouldn't have opened it. It was hers. I reached for it to put it back in the bag, and it fell open to a page near the middle. I looked down without meaning to, and then I couldn't look away. The page had numbers on it, column of numbers in Renata's handwriting, dates, amounts. At the top of the page, underlined groundwork operating account. Below it, check October 12th balance. M needs $40,000 minimum. And then, in a circle, $44,200 as of Friday. Enough. Tell him yes. I stood in the storage room for a long time. The building was quiet. Outside, I could hear the creek behind the property running fast from recent rain. $44,200 as of Friday. Enough! Tell him yes. Renata had checked my business account balance before the open house. She had communicated it to Marcus. She had confirmed the amount was sufficient. She had told him to proceed. The notebook was in her tote bag, in my storage room since the summer. She hadn't come back for it because she hadn't needed to. She hadn't thought I'd ever see it. I set it on the shelf, took a photo of the page with my phone, went back inside and sat at my desk for 20 minutes. Then I called Vivian. "That changes things considerably," she said. "That's conspiracy to commit theft, Nora. That's not her husband acting alone while she was unaware. She scouted it. She communicated the amount. She gave authorization. Yes. You need to preserve that notebook as evidence. Don't alter it. Don't move it from where you found it. Photograph it in context. Bag, location, everything. And then you need to call that officer you spoke with." I photographed the notebook in the tote bag on the floor, the open page, the surrounding room. I labeled every photograph with a timestamp. Then I called Detective Ansel Briggs. I'd spoken with Detective Briggs the previous Monday when I filed the initial report at the Harlow County Sheriff's Department. He was 47, methodical, the kind of investigator who wrote things down even when he didn't have to. He'd spent 20 minutes with my documentation that first meeting and said quietly, "You've organized this better than most people who've worked in law enforcement." My mother was a bookkeeper, I'd told him, and my father taught me that if a thing is worth building, it's worth maintaining the records. When I called him Tuesday with the notebook, he came to the studio that afternoon. He looked at the tote bag, the notebook, the photographs I'd taken. He had me write a formal statement describing the discovery, including the exact sequence, where I was, what I was doing, how it fell, what I saw. The note, combined with the transaction records, he said, gives the district attorney's office what it needs to consider charges for both individuals. I asked him what the likely timeline was. Investigation runs another 2 to 3 weeks. DA's office reviews could be 30 to 45 days before a decision. There's a family event coming up. My father's retirement dinner, November 12th. Both of them will be there. He looked at me steadily. "It's not my place to advise you on that. But I'll say, that evidence speaks clearly. Whatever happens at that dinner, the case doesn't depend on it." I drove home and sat on the back porch and watched the creek for a while. Tell him yes, my little sister, who I'd driven to the hospital at 2 a.m. when Caden was born early, who I'd taught to make her first pinch pot when she was 7 years old, who I'd held outside a courthouse when her first serious relationship ended in a restraining order. Tell him yes. I need to tell you about Celia Ruiz, because Celia is part of why I kept going when everything in me wanted to stop. Celia was 68 years old. She'd been coming to my studio for 7 years, initially for a memorial workshop, then for weekly open studio sessions, then eventually as one of my most consistent students. She'd retired from 25 years as a middle school art teacher. She had arthritic hands that made throwing difficult but made her glazing work extraordinary. She worked slowly and precisely, and the results were always remarkable. She came in the Wednesday after the open house, as she always did. She sat at her usual table, laid out her tools, and began working on a bowl she'd been shaping for 3 weeks. After an hour, she looked up at me. "You're not here today, Nora." I was sitting at the studio desk going through invoices for the 3rd time, trying to figure out which suppliers I could ask for extensions and which payments were hard deadlines. I told her what had happened, not all of it, just the shape of it. Theft, family, $42,000. She set down her trimming tool. "My late husband's brother borrowed $12,000 from us in 1998, she said. "We lent it because we loved him. He never paid us back. It wasn't $12,000. It was 12,000 reasons to be angry every time we saw him for the rest of his life." She looked at her hands, turned them over. "Don't let this become that. Whatever you decide to do, decide it cleanly, so you don't have to carry it forever." She went back to her bowl. I went back to my invoices. But I thought about what she said for a long time. Decide it cleanly. My father came to the studio the following Saturday. I hadn't asked him to. He just showed up at 10 a.m. with a bag from the bakery in town and sat at the table in my office while I finished a student session. When I came in, he was looking at the framed photos on the wall. A photo of the mill building the day I signed the lease. A photo of the first kiln I owned. A used electric I'd bought from a retiring ceramicist in Tennessee. A photo of a piece I'd made 3 years in. A tall vase with a matte ash glaze that had sold to a museum in Charlotte. "I watched you build this," he said when I sat down. "I know you did." He put the bakery bag between us. "Tell me what happened." I told him everything. The open house, the transfers, Marcus on the phone, the notebook, all of it. He listened without interrupting, which was unusual. My father was not a quiet man by nature. He made his feelings known. But when something was serious enough, he went still, and the stillness was its own kind of communication. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. "He took it while you were in the next room." "Yes?" "And Renata knew the amount." "Yes." He pulled a croissant from the bag and set it in front of me. "Your grandfather built cabinets for 30 years in this county. One time, a man he'd done work for twice came to him and said he couldn't pay the invoice for a custom kitchen set. Said he was in a tough spot. Your grandfather let the debt sit for 8 months. Then the man remodeled his living room with someone else. Your grandfather never said a word, but he also never took another job from that man, or from anyone that man referred. He just redirected." "That's not quite the situation here, Dad." "No," he agreed. "It's not. I'm just telling you that our family has a long habit of absorbing, rather than confronting, and I think I passed some of that to you." He looked at me. "What do you need?" "I need the ranch to survive. I need $42,000 back, and I think I need people who love me to understand what actually happened before they tell me how to respond to it." He nodded slowly. "I understand what happened, and I think you should do what needs to be done, whatever that is." He wasn't good at saying more than that, but it was enough. Vivian's full forensic summary arrived the following week. The picture it painted of Marcus Webb's finances was extraordinary in its excavated desperation. Over the 18 months preceding the open house, he had borrowed money from 4 sources. A private lender, the Alton Reed in the civil court records, out to the tune of $22,000, at terms Vivian described as predatory but technically legal. A business line of credit against the Webb Piedmont Partners LLC that had been maxed and renewed twice. A personal loan from a family member on his side that had gone unmentioned and unpaid for 14 months. And, most significantly, an informal arrangement with a group of private investors who had put $60,000 into the Piedmont commercial property deal he'd been building for 2 years. The deal had stalled. The property, a vacant retail complex on the edge of a development corridor, had failed 2 inspections. The financing he'd secured fell through when interest rates moved. The investors were requesting an accounting. He was in a leverage spiral. Vivian told me, each new obligation requiring him to service the previous one. The $42,000 from your account was him trying to buy time. Pay off Reed, stabilize the LLC, make a good faith payment to the investors to keep them from pulling out. Did he think he was going to pay me back? She paused. I think he told himself he would. I think people in that spiral always believe the next deal will close. The fact that he took it the way he did, without asking quickly through a transaction channel that wasn't his, suggests some part of him knew asking wasn't an option. Because he knew I'd say no. Because he knew you'd say no and he needed it more than he needed your permission. That sentence stayed with me for days. He needed it more than he needed your permission. There's a particular kind of entitlement that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't show up in people who are openly aggressive or unkind. It shows up in people who love you in a genuine way, while also believing that their need gives them claim to whatever you have. Marcus Webb had probably never thought of himself as a thief. He thought of himself as a man in a desperate situation who'd made a practical decision. The categories don't overlap in his mind because he'd already decided that my money was, in some sense, communal property. The fact that I'd never agreed to that arrangement was, to him, a technicality. My father's retirement dinner was November 12th. He was turning 64 and stepping back from the Finnish carpentry business he'd run for 3 decades. He was handing off most of his client relationships to his longtime apprentice, keeping a few small projects for himself. The dinner was at a private room at a restaurant in Asheville that my stepmother Carol had booked 6 weeks out. Guests were Dad and Carol, me, Renata and Marcus, Aunt Rosalie and her husband Jean, 3 of Dad's longtime friends from the trade, and Carol's daughter from her first marriage. 14 people around a long table. I had debated whether to come. I had debated what to do if I came. I had consulted with Vivian and with Detective Briggs and with Elliot, who gave me a single sentence. You know your family better than anyone. Trust your gut. I came with a folder. It wasn't as thick as it would become, but it was thorough. Transaction logs, device records showing the transfers originated from the studio's registered tablet. Elliot's written statement confirming his observation of Marcus at the tablet during the relevant window. Vivian's forensic summary, the photograph of the notebook page, and one more thing, something I'd added the morning of the dinner. Vivian had found in Marcus's LLC filings the names of the 4 private investors in Webb Piedmont Partners. One of them was Marcus's older brother, David Webb. Another was a colleague from his commercial real estate firm. The third was a retired developer in Charlotte. The fourth was Gene Harrington, Aunt Rosalie's husband. Gene had invested $15,000 in Marcus Webb's commercial real estate deal. He hadn't mentioned this to anyone in the family. When I called Aunt Rosalie to ask whether she knew, she was quiet for so long I thought the call had dropped. He told me it was a sure thing, she said finally. Last spring. Gene didn't tell me until the summer, when it started looking like it was going to take longer to close. Aunt Rosalie, the deal has likely failed. The $42,000 Marcus took from me was used in part to service the debts of an LLC that appears to be insolvent. Another long pause. Then, with a steadiness I recognized from my mother's side of the family, Gene needs to know this. I know. I'm going to your brother's dinner. I think we should talk before then. She came to the studio the following Tuesday, sat across from me at the work table with a cup of tea, and read through the forensic summary the way my mother used to read bank statements, carefully, with occasional small sounds of recognition or dismay. When she finished, she set it down. He borrowed our retirement savings, she said. Gene's been worried about it for months and not telling me the full picture. I know. How much of our $15,000 is recoverable? I don't know yet. Vivian is still tracing the LLC assets. She looked at the folder, then at me. What do you need from me? I need you and Gene to know what you're walking into at this dinner, and I'd like Gene to be willing to speak to what he invested in and when, if it comes to it. She nodded. He'll do it. He's embarrassed, but he's honest. November 12th. The private dining room at the restaurant had a long oak table. Good light, the smell of warm bread and wood smoke from a gas fireplace in the corner. Carol had done the centerpieces herself. Small arrangements of dried wildflowers in ceramic vessels she'd found at a craft fair. She'd bought them without knowing they were mine. I chose not to mention it. Dad was in his element. He told stories about jobs from 30 years ago with the same detail and energy he always did, stopping regularly to check that Carol had what she needed or to squeeze the hand of a friend he hadn't seen in months. He looked happy, which was everything. He'd built a life by making things with care, and people could see it in the room. I sat near the middle of the table. Renata and Marcus were across from me. She'd barely met my eyes when they arrived. He'd given me a nod that contained some complex combination of defiance and appeal. The expression of a man who hoped the setting would prevent a scene. Gene Harrington sat 3 seats down from Marcus, quiet through the first course, his eyes moving to the folder I'd placed on the empty chair beside me. He knew it was there. Aunt Rosalie had told him. He hadn't said a word to me yet, but when he caught my eye, he gave a small, steady nod. The appetizers were cleared. Dad was in the middle of a story about a hand-carved mantelpiece he'd done for a house in Weaverville that had appeared without his knowledge in a national architectural magazine. The table was laughing. Then Marcus reached for his wine and said to the table at large, casually, "Nora, you've been quiet tonight. Everything okay with the studio?" He was trying to set a tone before I could. I let a beat pass. "Actually, Dad, I want to say something. I'm sorry to do it at your dinner, but there's something this family needs to know, and I've been looking for the right moment for a month." Dad looked at me carefully. He already knew most of it. He set down his fork and gave me the floor. I kept my voice steady, the way I keep it steady when I'm explaining a repair process to a student, not flat, not cold, but even, present, clear. At my studio's open house on October 12th, Marcus used my merchant payment system to transfer $42,500 from my business operating account to his personal accounts. He did it while I was in the throwing room with students. He had access to the tablet because it was unlocked and I stepped away for 11 minutes. The table changed. I could feel it. The way a kiln environment shifts when you open the door, the whole atmosphere recalibrating. Marcus set his wine down. Nora, this is your father's retirement dinner. I know what day it is. You chose to bring it up. I reached into the folder, pulled the transaction log, highlighted tabbed, slid it to the center of the table where anyone could see it. 3 transfers, 16,500, 14,200, 11,800, all in a 13-minute window, all to accounts under MW. It was a loan, Marcus started. A loan is when you ask. I looked at him directly. You asked me once, about 6 months ago, whether my merchant app saved payment credentials. I told you it kept them active for logged-in sessions. I didn't think anything of it at the time. But you did. Renata's eyes went to the table. I also found this. I pulled out the photograph of the notebook page, placed it where it could be seen. This is from a notebook that was left in my storage room. It's Renata's handwriting. It reads, Groundwork Operating Account. Check October 12th balance. M needs 40,000 minimum, and then 44,200 as of Friday. Enough. Tell him yes. Sophie would have been in the car with them. Their daughter was 4. The night of the open house, she'd made 2 small clay pinch pots in the children's area and brought them home in a paper bag, carrying them so carefully all the way to the parking lot. Tell him yes. Renata's hands were in her lap. She wasn't looking at anything. Gene Harrington cleared his throat. I need to say something. His voice was quiet but solid. He'd been a general contractor for 30 years. He had the same quality my father had. The quality of a man who'd spent decades building things that had to hold weight. I invested $15,000 in Webb Piedmont Partners, LLC 18 months ago. Marcus presented it as a commercial development with strong projected returns. I haven't received any accounting for that investment in 4 months. After speaking with Nora this week, I understand that the LLC may be insolvent. The room was very still. Aunt Rosalie, beside him, had her hands folded on the table. She didn't add to it. She didn't need to. Marcus stood up. You've organized a family ambush at Gordon's retirement dinner. Do you have any idea what this is doing to... Sit down, Marcus. My father's voice was not loud, but it had a quality I'd heard very rarely in my life. The absolute baseline of authority, the voice he used when something structural was in danger. Marcus sat. Dad looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Renata, then at me. Nora, you said $42,000. Yes. And Renata knew the balance before he took it. I didn't answer. The photograph was on the table. Dad looked at Marcus. You went into my daughter's business account while she was working, and you took $42,000 without asking. Marcus spread his hands. Gordon, I needed it. The deal is close. I was going to, I'm not asking about the deal. Marcus's hands dropped. I built a business with my hands for 30 years. Dad said, I have had bad years. Years I didn't know if I could make payroll. I never reached into someone else's till. I'm going to pay it back. That's not the issue. The table was very quiet. The fireplace ticked. I pulled one more document from the folder, set it on the table. This is the forensic accounting summary prepared by Vivian Park, CPA. It traces the money from my account through 3 channels. Part of it went to the LLC. Part of it went to a private lender named Alton Reed. Part of it is unaccounted for in the current trace. I let the room sit with that. I filed a police report. Detective Ansel Briggs at the Harlow County Sheriff's Department has been assigned the case. The district attorney's office is reviewing for potential charges. Marcus looked at me with a something in his face that I'd never seen there before. Not anger, he was past that. Something colder. The expression of a man who has just realized the walls are real. You're serious. I was serious the morning after it happened when I called you and you told me you needed it more than I did. I'm still serious now. Renata made a sound that wasn't quite words, a small, compressed sound of someone in pain. Renata! I kept my voice as gentle as I could. I know you're scared. I know the situation at home has been frightening, but you checked my balance and you wrote enough and you told him to go ahead. You have to know what that means. She looked up. Her eyes were wet. I didn't know about the investors. I didn't know about Jean. Marcus told me it was a short-term bridge, that you'd get it back in 30 days. And you didn't ask me, because you knew I'd say no. She closed her eyes. That was its own answer. Dad looked around the table. His retirement dinner, Carol's dried wildflowers in my ceramic vessels, his friends from the trade watching quietly, the way people watch things that aren't their business but that they'll remember for a long time. "Carol," he said, "could you give us a few minutes?" She nodded, touched his shoulder once, and went to the corridor. His friends followed without being asked, the professional social instinct of people who knew when to leave a room. It was just family. What happened in the next 40 minutes was not a fight. It was, in some ways, harder than a fight. Marcus tried twice more to reframe what he'd done, first as a miscommunication, then as a loan he'd intended to formalize. My father dismantled both framings without raising his voice. He was methodical about it, the way he was methodical about any repair. Find the actual problem, name it accurately, don't embellish. Renata didn't defend Marcus. She didn't collapse either. She sat with her hands in her lap and answered the questions she was asked and didn't volunteer anything beyond what was directly asked. She was protecting something, herself probably, the version of herself that hadn't known about the full scope of it. "The gambling," she said at one point. Everyone looked at her. "He's been on sports betting sites for 2 years. I found out 6 months ago. He said he's stopped." She looked at her hands. "The money for Reed. That's not just a private lender. Reed fronts bets. He's a sports bookmaker who operates through a money-lending structure." Another piece of the picture. Marcus stared at the table. He didn't confirm or deny it. He didn't have to. Aunt Rosalie looked at Jean. Jean looked at the ceiling. My father said, "Marcus." Marcus looked up. "You are going to call Detective Briggs tomorrow morning. You are going to voluntarily provide a full financial accounting, and you are going to make arrangements to begin repaying my daughter. Whatever that looks like, whatever it takes. That is the only path forward that doesn't involve my full cooperation with the district attorney's office." "I can't." "Gordon, the deal isn't closed yet. I don't have liquid." "Then you'll figure out how to get liquid. That is what Nora had to do when you took her operating budget." Marcus looked at me one more time. "I will pay you back." "I know you will," I said, "because it's been documented well enough that you don't have a choice." He left before dessert. He walked out through the restaurant alone, coat over his arm, without saying anything to anyone. Renata stayed. She helped Carol bring out the birthday cake Carol had ordered from a local baker. Chocolate with hazelnuts, Dad's favorite. We sang. He laughed and said no one was allowed to take a photo because he looked ridiculous in the candlelight. We took photos anyway. After, while the restaurant was clearing the table, Renata found me at the coat rack. "What happens to me?" she asked. "I don't know," I said. "You weren't the one who accessed the account, but the notebook is in the evidence file. That's not something I can undo." "I know. How long has the gambling been happening?" She looked at the coat rack. "I think maybe 4 years. I only knew for certain for 6 months. He told me it was under control. He tells me a lot of things are under control." "Are you safe?" She looked at me then, a direct look, the one from when we were kids, before anything got complicated. "Physically, yes. Otherwise," she shook her head, "I don't know what I'm doing yet." "You don't have to know tonight. Are we okay?" I thought about the notebook. About enough. Tell him yes. About Sophie making clay pots at my open house while her father was at my tablet taking everything I'd built in 9 years. "I don't know yet," I said, "but I love you. And that's not going away." She nodded. We didn't hug. We weren't there yet. But we stood next to each other for a moment in the quiet of the coat room, sisters, which is a thing that doesn't stop being true no matter what. The legal outcome took 11 weeks. Marcus agreed to a negotiated settlement with the district attorney's office rather than face trial. The charges, unauthorized access to a computer system with intent to commit theft, felony level given the amount, were reduced in exchange for a full guilty plea, mandatory restitution, and 2 years of supervised probation. The restitution was structured as a wage garnishment, a portion of his monthly income directed to my account until the full $42,500 was recovered. Additionally, as a condition of the agreement, Marcus was required to provide a full accounting of the Webb Piedmont Partners LLC to the investors, including Jean. The LLC was formally wound down, the commercial property was sold at a loss, and the remaining equity was distributed to the investors. Jean and Aunt Rosalie recovered roughly 40 cents on the dollar. Not good, but not nothing. Renata filed for separation in January. She moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in West Asheville with Caden and Sophie and started working part-time at a nonprofit while she figured out what came next. Marcus moved into a furnished studio in Hendersonville. He attended mandated counseling for problem gambling. He did not contact me. What I want to tell you about the aftermath is not the legal part. The legal part was important, and I don't regret any of it. But the part I carry most is smaller and harder to name. Elliot kept the studio running during the worst of it. He managed the December holiday sales and the January workshops and the February specialty glazing session without missing a beat. He didn't ask me what I was going to do about the money or the family. He just showed up at 8 a.m. and did the work. And he got paid on time every single month because I wasn't going to let the studio miss payroll, even if I had to carry it on the emergency line of credit Vivienne helped me secure. The emergency credit line was the bridge, $25,000 from a small business lender Vivienne had worked with before, collateralized against the mill building. I used it carefully and paid it down monthly as the restitution payments came in. By spring, the studio was whole. Celia Ruiz came in every Wednesday as she always had. Her bowl, the one she'd been shaping the morning I told her what happened, finished beautifully, a wide, shallow form with a celadon glaze that pooled at the base. She gave it to her daughter for her birthday. She sent me a photo. I kept it on my phone for a long time. In April, Renata called to ask if she could bring Caden and Sophie to the studio on a Saturday. She said she wanted them to make something with their hands. She said she thought it might help. I said yes. They came on a Saturday in late April when the dogwoods in the hollow were just opening. Sophie remembered where the clay was kept. She went straight for the wedging table with the authority of someone who'd been here before. Renata and I sat in the small office while the kids worked with Elliot. She looked better. Not healed. You don't heal that fast from what she'd been living in. But cleaner. Like the pressure had been released, even if the residue was still there. I keep going over it, she said. The notebook. What I wrote. You don't have to explain it to me. I want to. She folded her hands in her lap, the way our mother does when she's choosing words carefully. I knew it was wrong. I knew, even while I was writing it. But I had been so afraid for so long that the fear had just become normal. Like weather. Like the way the house is in the morning. I was afraid we'd lose everything. And Marcus was afraid of what would happen if Reed came collecting. And somehow in that fear, your money started to feel like something that was just there. That could solve it. My money wasn't there for solving your problems. I know. I knew. She looked at the work table. I've thought about it 100 times. What would have happened if I just asked you? Not Marcus, me. If I just called you and said, we're in trouble. We're genuinely in trouble. Can you help? Do you think you would have? I thought about it honestly. I owed her that. I don't know. Maybe part of it. Maybe none of it. Not $42,000. But I would have helped you think through it. I would have called Vivian and had her look at the books. I would have helped you figure out what was actually going on instead of what Marcus was telling you was going on. She closed her eyes. He never let me see the full picture. I see that now. I know. We sat quietly. Through the window, I could see Elliot showing Caden how to score and slip 2 pieces of clay together. Sophie was patting her work with both palms, very seriously. I'm not there yet, I said. With you. I want you to know that I love you and I know your situation was real, and I'm also not past what happened. Both of those things are true. That's fair, she said. It's more than fair. But your kids can come here any time. That's separate. She nodded. And you should call me. I looked at her directly. If you need help, really need help, call me and ask. That's how this works. She nodded again, smaller this time, like it cost something to receive. In June, I did something I'd been putting off for 3 years. I broke ground on the glaze room expansion. It was a small addition to the back of the mill building, a 16 by 20 room with proper ventilation, a secondary kiln station, and a wet bar for glaze mixing. I'd had the drawings done for 2 years. I'd been saving the deposit in the operating account for 18 months. I hired a local contractor. The work took 6 weeks. My father came up for the framing inspection and spent 3 hours walking the structure with the contractor, asking questions in his professional way. Afterward, he stood in the middle of the unfinished room with the afternoon light coming through the new windows and said, "Good bones." "Yes," I said. "You learned that." "From you." He put his hand on the unfinished wall. "Good." My mother came to the studio in August, first time since before the open house. She drove up on her own, which she rarely did anymore since her eyes had gotten worse for driving at night. She arrived in the morning and left after lunch. She walked the mill building slowly, looking at everything. The gallery walls, the kiln room, the new glaze addition finished now and in use, the workshop space where a class of 6 was working when she arrived. She didn't say much during the tour, but at lunch, sitting at the picnic table outside with sandwiches and iced tea, she said, "I told Renata to get you to fix it." "I know. I've always done that. Since you were small. Nora will figure it out. Nora will handle it. Nora knows what to do." "Mom, let me say it." She looked at her tea glass. "I did it so many times it became invisible to me, asking you to carry things, assuming you could, calling it helping when it was really just handing it to you and walking away. You didn't know he was going to steal from me." "No, but I told you to keep the peace. I told you to find a way to handle it that didn't make waves, because waves were uncomfortable for me." She looked up. "That was wrong. I want you to know I know that." This was more than I'd expected. My mother was not someone who said I was wrong easily. The credit union had trained her to speak in corrections and adjustments, not admissions. "Thank you," I said. "You built something real here, Nora." "I know. I don't think I ever said that clearly enough. I was proud of you, and I was also always slightly worried about you, which I know is a contradiction, but that's what it was. And sometimes the worry came out looking like doubt, and I'm sorry for that." We sat in the August heat. Down in the hollow, the creek was running low, reduced by the summer dry. Later in the season, when the rains came, it would rise again and eat a little more of the bank, taking soil it had been meaning to take for years. "You can come whenever you want," I said. "You don't have to call first." She smiled, a small one, the kind that comes from the back of something. "I might take one of your classes." "I'd like that. I want to tell you what I know now that I didn't know a year ago. I used to think that being the capable one was just who I was. A personality feature, something I'd been born with, like my father's eyes or my mother's handwriting, the one who handles things, the one who figures it out, the one people call when the problem is too big for someone else to hold. What I understand now is that it's not a personality feature, it's a role. And roles are assigned by the people around you, often so gradually that by the time you realize you've been cast in one, you've been playing it for 20 years. My family needed a capable one, so they didn't have to be. Not because they couldn't have managed on their own. I think they could have. But because I was available, I was willing, I was, in all the ways that mattered, open. An open hand is a generous thing, but an open hand is also something that can be taken from. I don't regret being the kind of person I am. I don't regret building groundwork ceramics from a leaky mill building and borrowed determination. I don't regret the veterans who come to the studio now for the adaptive pottery program Elliot helped me launch in the spring. People with tremors or prosthetics or injuries who sit at the wheel and find that clay doesn't care about any of that, only about pressure and water and the direction your hands go. I don't regret loving my family, even the parts of them that made choices I can't fully understand. What I've changed is this. I no longer keep the door unlocked for everyone. You can love people with your whole heart and still lock the door. You can be generous without being inexhaustible. You can be the capable one and still require that people ask before they take. These are not contradictions. These are just the difference between an open hand and an empty one. I found that out the hard way, in a storage room in a cardboard box, with a notebook that told me more about the people I loved than I'd ever learned from their faces. The creek behind the property flooded again this past spring. It ate 2 more feet of bank. But I'd had a landscape contractor reinforce the erosion zone the previous fall, and when the flood came, the bank held. That's the only thing, I think, not stopping the water, just making sure the bank holds. My name is Nora Callihan. I make things with my hands, and I keep careful books, and I've learned the hardest way that the people who love you are sometimes the ones who reach the deepest. Keep your accounts up to date, keep your passwords locked, and when someone takes from you, name it clearly how to door, because the numbers don't lie even when the people do. Thank you for being here.